Well, welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thank you for sharing your day with us. Breaking news just moments ago, an alleged Russian spy pleading guilty in federal court here in Washington. Maria Butina told the judge this morning that she conspired to act as an illegal foreign agent. Federal prosecutors now say Butina is cooperating and sharing information on who directed her to infiltrate one of the most important organizations in Republican politics, the National Rifle Association. CNN's Jessica Snyder live outside the courthouse in Washington, D.C. Morning that she conspired to act as an illegal foreign agent. Federal prosecutors now say Butina is cooperating and sharing information on who directed her to infiltrate one of the most important organizations in Republican politics, the National Rifle Association. CNN's Jessica Snyder live outside the courthouse in Washington, D.C.
Said how she worked with a U.S. citizen to organize a so-called friendship dinner where important figures would be there and that they would discuss Russian-American policy. And they also said that as recently as 2017, Maria Butina went to the National Prayer Breakfast. And she said that the people there, and she put it this way, prosecutors saying they were coming to establish a back channel of communication. So really a remarkable portrayal by prosecutors about how exactly Maria Butina operated. Remember, she said that she was here in Washington, D.C. solely to be a graduate student at American University. Now she is admitting in court that she did conspire to act as a foreign agent. She pled guilty to that. And we know that her sentencing will be coming up on February 12th. The judge actually delaying the sentencing because prosecutors intend to continue working with Butina, seeing what other information they can get from her, perhaps more information about how Russians tried to infiltrate these political organizations, and she might have some insight into how they meddled or interfered in the 2016 election. John, she is facing up to 5 years in prison. Of course, that sentence could be reduced depending on how much she actually cooperates with prosecutors. And after that, after she is sentenced and faces that prison time, she ultimately will be deported, likely to Russia. John?
Jessica Snyder outside the federal courthouse. Appreciate the live reporting. Let's bring in our CNN legal analyst, Michael Zeldin, for some analysis here. Michael, as you learn the details of this case, and obviously there's more to be learned as she continues to cooperate and we see the actual court filings, is this run-of-the-mill spying? We do it on people too. The United States has people who try to infiltrate organizations in other countries around the seas, overseas. Let's not be naive. Or in the context of the Russian effort to play the Trump campaign, to infiltrate the Trump campaign, to test cyber-wise whether they could infiltrate election systems. And you have a young woman here trying to essentially build relationships within a major political organization, the NRA and other conservative groups. Put it into context.
So it's a little of both. Remember, we had that television series, The Americans, which were Russians who came here and assumed U.S. identities for the purpose of being foreign agents. We saw the Tom Hanks movie on the bridge. She had a little of that, but I think in the broader context, we have to see her as part of a multi-pronged effort by the Russians to infiltrate 2016. You had prong one, the social media efforts through Facebook and Twitter and the like. You had two, the hacking, which was, a direct effort to steal information and then distribute it through WikiLeaks. Now you see the third part, which is another element of this, which is direct contact with American politicians. We saw it with Jared Kushner, with his back channel and the Russian ambassador. We see it with Don Jr. at the Trump Tower. Now we see it with Butina and the NRA and direct politicians. And the last thing will be, which will be fleshed out, will be financing of the transition. So you got these four legs of a stool. This is just one part of that broader context, I think.
It's a fascinating piece as we learn more about it, and we'll bring you more if we get more from the courtroom. In a related subject, fresh tweets from the president today, same investigation, laying down a new legal marker. Why should I be held responsible, the president says, if my lawyer gives me bad advice? Quote, I never directed Michael Cohen to break the law, the president tweeted this morning. The president says Michael Cohen, his longtime lawyer and fixer, should have known better. And if he knew something was illegal, Cohen, the president says, should have told candidate Trump, stop. That is why they get paid. Quote from the president there. A judge sentenced Cohen yesterday to serve 3 years in prison. And one of the crimes is what prosecutors painted as a wide-ranging conspiracy to funnel hush money payments through shell corporations with the cooperation of a tabloid. A judge, prosecutors, Cohen, and now American Media, the parent company of the National Enquirer, all say this scheme was directed by a man identified in court papers as Individual 1. That would be the President of the United States. With me to share their reporting and their insights, CNN's Caitlin Collins, Perry Bacon of 538, Karen Demersion with the Washington Post. Michael Zeldin stays with us. If you read these tweets this morning, and this is part of your job, sadly, for better or worse, it's part of all of our jobs. This was not normal Trump tone. This was clearly done in consultation with somebody on his legal team who didn't like the looser language the president used in describing this the other day. What's he trying to do here?
You can always tell when it's a Trump tweet and when it's something he's dictated and when it's something that he's had the help of someone with, because the president doesn't use terms like liability, and he doesn't usually tweet the way that we saw him tweet this morning in that three-part series, but it was seeking to put some distance between himself and Michael Cohen. And he's saying he's not disputing that he directed Michael Cohen to make these payments. He's disputing that he directed Michael Cohen to break the law while making these payments, essentially saying Michael Cohen should have known better because he was my legal counsel, and if he didn't know better, how is that my fault? This is not what President Trump said before when he denied on camera on Air Force One making these payments or knowing about these payments in the first place. He said he didn't know about the Stormy Daniels payment, that they would have to ask Michael Cohen about it. And then not only do we have that, him saying on camera he knew about Stormy Daniels, or him saying he didn't know about it, and now he's saying he did. He's also in an audio recording with Michael Cohen discussing the other payment, the payment to Kara McDougal, $150,000 to her to keep her quiet as well. So we're seeing the president's story continue to change from I didn't know about these payments. Well, I did know about these payments. They didn't break campaign finance violations. Well, if they did, it was Michael Cohen's fault and not mine.
Not my fault. He's the CEO of the operation. He's now the CEO of the country, and it's not his fault. It's Michael Cohen's fault. It's Paul Manafort's fault. It's Rick Gates' fault. It's Michael Flynn's fault. It's never his fault. That's a recurring theme here. To that point, let's listen to a bit of that audio. This is Michael Cohen. One of the president's arguments, and Rudy Giuliani made this clear yesterday, is that Michael Cohen wasn't so loyal. He was secretly recording the president. They have a point there, but the recordings are important.
And I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with funding. Yes. And it's all the stuff.
Now, Alan Weisselberg is the CFO of the Trump Organization, who is now apparently cooperating with the Southern District of New York as well. So you have Michael Cohen's testimony. You have Mr. Weisselberg's testimony, the guy who knows the numbers, knows the books. Now you have American Media. David Packer, the president's longtime friend, who runs the National Enquirer, the Southern District of New York, releasing this just after Michael Cohen's sentencing yesterday. AMI made a payment in the amount of $150,000. You just heard about it on the tape there. In cooperation, consultation, in concert with, and at the request and suggestion of one or more members or agents of a candidate's 2016 presidential campaign to ensure that a woman did not publicize damaging allegations about that candidate before the 2016 presidential election and thereby influence the election. The president is trying to make the case, this is like John Edwards, it's not direct campaign finance violations. You have AMI, Michael Cohen, presumably Mr. Weisselberg. The president's getting lonely on this one.
Right. I think that AMI, we're now away from the Michael Cohen is disloyal, he's a liar, because he has lied about things in front of Congress that is relevant here, to a broader group of people saying this was a conspiracy or a project to violate campaign finance law and hide these affairs. I think yesterday was significant. This news is really significant.
And I agree with that. And I think that an additional piece of evidence is the manner in which the monies were paid and repaid. Remember, Michael Cohen sets up a limited liability company, Essentials something or other, designed specifically for this payment. Then he's repaid through essentially being a straw employee of the Trump Organization. They jacked it up to $430,000 so that it covers his taxes. Then they give him additional sort of bonus for doing it, and they pay him in monthly increments. All that speaks to knowledge of the organization of which Trump is the CEO, as you called him. And so I think it undermines the notion that I relied on counsel. The other point is that, of course, for the campaign, his FEC counsel was Don McGahn. Right. And so if he wanted to do it properly, he would have asked Don McGahn how to do it, right, not do this, circuitous way with Cohen.
With a guy whose joint title is, fixer and Fixer and lawyer. And to that point, another piece of this, Michael Cohen continues to cooperate. Michael Cohen says he shared his testimony before he went up to Congress and lied. Michael Cohen says he lied in the sense that he told Congress the Trump Tower-Moscow conversations ended very early in 2016. Mr. Trump's becoming a serious candidate. We decided we've got to shut this down. Now he says they went on through June, at a time when he was the presumptive nominee, at a time when he was saying let's ease sanctions on Russia, at a time when the Republicans were watering down their platform. Michael Cohen says this. Now listen to Lanny Davis, who's an attorney who now says he's going to be a communications advisor to Michael Cohen, saying, guess what? The White House knew Michael Cohen lied.
They knew that the testimony was going to be what Michael Cohen knew to be false testimony about the Moscow tower. So there's no question that President Trump knew what Michael's testimony would be. Mr. Trump and the White House knew that Michael Cohen would be testifying falsely to Congress and did not tell him not to.
I mean, if that's true, the jeopardy for the president is getting deeper and deeper, or steeper and steeper. I don't know the right word for it, in the sense that implicated and now allegedly corroborating witnesses in felony campaign finance violations. If the White House was involved and the White House knew, Michael Cohen says, this is what I'm going to tell the Senate, they know it's false and they don't stop him?
Right. I mean, the other question is Michael Cohen just independently saying, hey, this is what I'm going to tell the Senate, and never, check to see if maybe they said, oh, could you make sure that you don't tell the Senate this, right? So, I mean, there's a whole, several other layers of trying to figure out what the discussions were that transpired and who was briefing who on what should be said before he actually came all the way to Congress and said things that he was now saying were lies. And at the end of the day, Michael Cohen is the one who was sitting in that room, is the one that was being asked the question, is the one who perjured himself in that way, not the president. However, if there's direction here, if there's organization, if there's plans that are being laid before he actually gets to that point, that just makes it look worse and worse for the president. And again, it undermines what we were talking about before, that he's tried to pin this entirely on his lawyer. If he knew, it's not really just a Michael Cohen game anymore.
And he is trying to pin it on his lawyer, but that's the question. Are we supposed to believe that Michael Cohen came to the president and said, we've got to pay these two women who were alleging whatsoever, and President Trump, who is not just loose and free with his money, was like, okay, let's pay them each over 6 figures. That is really hard to believe for anyone who knows Donald Trump.
Right. He's not known as a hands-off guy, whatever the issue within his organization.
Right.
Often to his credit, but he's not known as a hands-off guy. So, as I said, I don't know if it's steeper and steeper or deeper and deeper, but the president's troubles are mounting. Up next for us, walls work. That's the new messaging strategy from the Department of Homeland Security. But the question is, can the department convince Congress that a wall is worth a government shutdown? Welcome back to stone cold silence in the negotiations to avoid a partial government shutdown. Aides on Capitol Hill telling CNN Democrats and Republicans still are not talking about the next steps. And there's an understanding that it's up to President Trump to counter and break the current stalemate. This morning, the president did a version of that, tweeting, I often stated one way or the other, Mexico is going to pay for the wall. This has never changed. Our new deal with Mexico and Canada, the USMCA, is so much better than the old, very costly and anti-USA NAFTA deal that just by the money we save, Mexico is paying for the wall. It's an interesting way to do wall math. That tweet making Senator Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat in the Senate, say, well, then, okay, problem solved.
Well, Mr. President, if you say Mexico is going to pay for the wall through NAFTA, which it certainly won't, then I guess we don't have to. Let's fund the government.
It's worth noting that the president did speak to his new counterpart in Mexico yesterday. A White House summary of that call makes zero. That would be zero mention of Mexico paying for anything. CNN's Phil Mattingly joins us live from Capitol Hill. Phil, there's some confusion, obviously, and I'm going to try to do the trade deal math on paying for the wall. But can you tell me, is there a clear path forward?
You know, if there's one benefit to how many of these fights we've been through up on Capitol Hill, it's that congressional staffers have any number of ways to thread the needle and get themselves out of this. They've been kind of crisis hardened, if you will, when it comes to legislating out of crises. Here's the problem, and you mentioned it up top. They can't move until the president moves. We're told that the president and the White House have not been in discussions with House Democrats or Leader Nancy Pelosi since a brief phone call after that meeting earlier this week. They have not been talking to Senate Democrats. And when you talk to Republicans in both chambers, they're not sure how to proceed because they don't know what the president actually wants. In fact, I asked Senator John Cornyn earlier today, the number 2 ranked Republican in the United States Senate, what his thought was on the president's broader strategy. He said, I don't know. And that's where people stand right now. To give you a sense of kind of the uncertainty right now, I've been talking to a lot of staffers who have been paying very close attention to the president's Twitter account and noting that he hasn't fired back at Leader Pelosi. He hasn't fired back at Leader Schumer. And perhaps that's a sign, or perhaps his tweet about Mexico that you read earlier, perhaps that's a sign that he's backing off. The reality is nobody really knows right now. They know it ebbs and flows and is a little bit like a roller coaster. And as the clock ticks down, there are pathways out of this. One thing that's certain, Democrats feel like they have the leverage and they're not going to budge. That means it's up to the president to do so. And at this point, nobody knows if the president's willing to. John.
So we will wait to see if he blinks or has a counter-proposal. Phil Mattingly live on the Hill. Thank you very much. Let's discuss it in the room. And Catherine Lucy from the Associated Press joins the conversation. Here's one of the reasons the president is doing this, in the sense that, look, he's been on 2 issues, he's been very consistent, trade and immigration, throughout the campaign. For all his roller coasters, he's pretty consistent. But now after this election, the Republicans got shellacked. They lost control of the House. The president's trying to, A, think about his re-election, B, an environment where the Mueller investigation continues. The Democrats are going to investigate him. So he's doubling down on the wall. Why? A brand new poll we're releasing this hour. Do you favor building a wall along the entire border with Mexico? 8 in 10 Republicans, 81% say yes. Only 38% of independents and only 7% of Democrats. So the president has lost most of the country here. But 80% of Republicans say build the wall. The president's trying to keep that base locked in.
That's right. I mean, we've seen this again and again. When he's in doubt, he wants to go back to his base, he wants to reassure his base, and he really wants to give this promises kept message. And we saw him really lean into immigration rhetoric, wall rhetoric during the campaign, and he credits that for the success they had in the Senate. I mean, if not the House, obviously. So he's coming back to it. We've seen sort of some mixed messages throughout the week. I mean, in addition to the meeting with some,
You're being very kind.
Well, we had obviously the tweet today, but early in the week the conversation about how a lot of the wall has been built, which is not the case. A lot of the wall has not been built. There's been some renovation of existing fencing. And we're kind of waiting. The White House was surprised. Certainly some people in the White House were surprised by the tack he took in the meeting with the congressional leaders. And we really are sort of waiting now to see what he does. He has not fully unleashed.
He got baited into that,
yeah.
And he took the bait. But there's an interesting point. However this ends up, we're approaching the 2-year mark. And you have to give, President Trump some grace. He was in the business community, never worked in government. So you'd understand the White House doesn't work in normal procedures. But this is the number 2 Senate Republican. Phil just touched on this, John Kernan. I don't understand the strategy, but maybe he's figured it out, and he'll tell us in due course. But I don't understand it. If your own party and the leaders of your own party, the people who have to carry the water for you and get this to the finish line, don't have a clue what you're doing, how do you get things done?
Well, you keep everybody in doubt until you can make a deal maybe by yourself, which the president has seemed to try to do, but he's not somebody that follows through on the nitty-gritty that has to be done to actually get these things to the finish line. Cornyn also is not somebody who normally is out there criticizing Trump, so the fact that it's him saying this tells you really quite how frustrated the GOP is. I think that this is one of those moments at which you have to kind of wonder if the Republicans are just going to try to tune out the president and whatever the president is angling for and wants, because he can continue to play the public role. They have to decide whether or not to get the budget done. But, and then that's a question of, will they end up calling the president's bluff? Will he veto the whole thing because he doesn't get his wall? But at this point, if you don't have that synergy between the Republicans on the Hill and the Republican in the White House, it's kind of anybody's guess who's going to win out. And at the end of the day, if the president kind of gets distracted from that negotiating room, they may just decide to go it alone without him.
I do think Cornyn is being a tiny bit disingenuous here. The president is trying to, get the wall built, have an extreme idea out there, negotiate toward the middle. On the wall issue itself, we really have 3 parties. We have Trump and maybe the House Freedom Caucus. We have the mainstream Republicans who really don't care about the wall. We have the Democrats. And part of this is the Republicans don't really want the wall that much in Congress and don't really want to fight for it.
That's a great point, because listen here, this is Nancy Pelosi, who has now, we'll talk more about this part of it later, has now secured the votes to be the next Speaker of the House. She was in the Oval Office when the Democrats, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, got President Trump to say, I'd be proud to shut down the government over border security. Nancy Pelosi today saying, explain.
Does he want to have government closed forever? I mean, what's this about? I know he doesn't believe in government. I know he doesn't know that much about what is at risk to shut it down. Let's talk about what we can do right now to keep government open. There is strong bipartisan support to do that. The only obstacle is the President of the United States.
This, to me, is a very interesting gambit. She's betting, to your point, that they can't get it through the House, that especially the moderates who just lost have no loyalty to President Trump, and that the House Republicans won't be able to get it through. Some House Republicans say the more Nancy Pelosi talks like that, maybe that will rally the Republicans to say we have to do this. Let's not make it about the president. Let's make it about Leader Pelosi. Where are we going?
Well, isn't there also an issue with actually physically having enough Republicans in place to do a vote? I mean, it's brinksmanship on both sides. She's challenging him. The president certainly hasn't backed away. And people around the president also will argue that he is underestimated in moments like this, and sometimes his strategies can, sort of move the ball or make things happen.
Potentially, and Democrats are clearly feeling smug after that meeting that everyone watched play out at the White House. But a lot of this does come between President Trump and Republicans who do not know what the president wants with this. He's saying today that the new NAFTA USMCA is going to pay for this. It hasn't even passed through Congress yet. So actually, that hasn't even been clarified. And also, the president is the one who signed a budget at the beginning of this year that had $1.6 billion funding for his border wall. Even that has not been spent. And it's the president who signed that $1.6. It was his White House budget director, Mick Mulvaney, who put that number in the budget. So that is why Republicans are essentially saying, what are we supposed to do now that you've changed your mind? Now you want all more of this money. Even though he begrudgingly signed that, that is raising the question. But it does seem to be just the president and aides in the White House knowing they are not getting this $5 billion for this wall, but they want to be seen to their supporters as making the argument for it. And that's why you see the president not only fight for that, but also say, well, we've got barbed wire plus happening. We've got this. That is not the wall his supporters were expecting when they voted for him.
Barbed wire plus, and the taxpayers paid for it. All right, we'll keep it. The clock is ticking, but we'll keep an eye on this one. Up next, conflict of interest questions for a senior Republican senator. Why his stock purchase raising eyebrows on Capitol Hill. Welcome back. The Republican senator who leads the Armed Services Committee facing scrutiny today for buying stock in a defense contractor after urging the Trump administration to spend more money on the military. Financial disclosure forms show that Senator James Inhofe from Oklahoma bought $50,000 to $100,000 in stock in the company Raytheon, a prominent defense contractor. But Inhofe's communications director says it was a mistake and that the senator canceled the transaction as soon as he became aware of it. CNN's Lauren Fox is live for us on Capitol Hill. Lauren, you just spoke to Senator Inhofe. What did he say about this?
Well, he said, look, this is a big misunderstanding. I did not mean to just purchase stock right after urging the president to boost military spending. He told me that this is a large firm that makes investments and it's blind. He doesn't know what they're investing in. Here's what he told me earlier today.
I had no saying in any of the investments that took place by this group because I'm one of 900 and some clients that all invest in the same thing. Now, so that it wouldn't look bad, I've said when you come to our account, you can take out anything that might look like an aerospace or a defense contractor, and that's what they've done.
Now, John, I spoke with ethics experts this morning, and they told me that it is actually not illegal for members of Congress to invest in companies that have something to do with how they are regulating them. So somebody like Inhofe can absolutely invest in a company like Raytheon, but obviously it opens up questions about ethics and how it looks. And that is exactly why Inhofe told me he no longer will have his investment firm making those kind of security buys. And from going forward, that's how he's going to change this.
Lauren Fox, live for us on Capitol Hill. Appreciate your catching up to the senator, acting quickly in this case. Does that put it to rest? That I saw it, said, oops, can't do that, boom?
It seems a little fishy to me, and shout out to the Daily Beast for breaking this story and reporting on this. I mean, he's the leader of the Senate committee that is going to be approving the Pentagon's budget. So that raises conflict of interest questions, of course, as she noted, but he's been around for a while. He knows how this is. And the Daily Beast also noted that letter to his financial advisor advising him not to invest in these defense stocks came about 20 minutes, according to the metadata, after they had reached out for comment. So it does raise a ton of questions about his conduct. And I think his office has quickly jumped on this, trying to downplay it and say that there was nothing negative.
The lesson being that if you're a member of Congress anyway, but especially if you're a senior member, committee chairman, ranking member, this should be in place already. You shouldn't have to wait till a news organization calls to ask you about something. This should be, the prohibition should be in place already. But I guess kudos to the senator for at least realizing he has a problem and acting quickly on it. While we're in the swamp conversation, I want to show you a photo. This is the president's lead attorney. It's a key moment in the Mueller investigation. There's a lot happening. That's why Rudy Giuliani is in Bahrain. Sitting down here overseas, His Majesty the King receives high-level U.S. delegation. No, Rudy Giuliani, again, the president's lead lawyer, is not in Bahrain on official U.S. government business. He's there soliciting a contract for his law firm / consulting firm, which does security consulting around the world. Should the president's lead attorney be using that position? Now, Rudy Giuliani was America's mayor after 9/11. He's well known around the world. But at the moment, he is the lead attorney for a president who says he will drain the swamp. That's the swamp.
That is the swamp.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to be doing so at this time is especially bad optics because Bahrain is an ally of Saudi Arabia. And right now, front and center in Congress right now, we're talking about rebuking the Crown Prince over the death of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. We're talking about a Yemen resolution being on the floor right now to withdraw U.S. support from that Saudi-led coalition. I mean, this is the worst possible timing if you're going to be doing the swamp, particularly the Gulf swamp, that kind of outreach. Just don't do it this week when all when all eyes are on the Gulf and on Saudi Arabia and the vitriol is at an all-time high.
How about if you agree to come back into public service? I know he's the president's private attorney. He's not a government official, but he's still working for the president of the United States, has access inside those gates. How about can't touch this stuff while I'm doing this work? What's so hard about that? I don't think...
Or if you want to do foreign policy, be an ambassador, be the Secretary of State, get confirmed to a job, join the NSC. We have people who talk to government from other countries. It is not the president's lawyer.
His Majesty the King receives high-level U.S. delegation. Okay. Up next, it's the end of the year. Congress still... Topping our political radar today, a big list of leftovers for the lame duck Congress. This afternoon, a big vote in the United States Senate on the U.S. role in the Saudi-led war in Yemen. The foreign focus, a small part of a long to-do list. One of those items, criminal justice reform, is a presidential priority. But today, a Republican senator says, hold up and wait a minute before we vote.
Will you try and block it?
Yes.
Yep. Can you?
Probably not.
Congressman Mark Meadows off the short list to become the next White House Chief of Staff. The White House confirms that, saying the North Carolina Republican is, quote, a great friend to President Trump, but that the president believes he's needed in Congress. This comes just a day after the president told Reuters Meadows was in the running and called him a great guy. Meanwhile, the former Republican House Speaker Newt Gingrich laughing off rumors. He's under consideration. Speaker Gingrich was at the White House yesterday with his wife. He tells Fox he was just wandering around looking at the Christmas decorations. Melania Trump opening up in a new interview, telling Fox News she knows she's going to get criticized for what goes on at the White House. She says the hardest part is people using that criticism for their own gain.
Would you want to stay for a second term?
I think my husband, he's doing an incredible job. The country does best ever.
What's been the hardest thing that you have to deal with?
I would say the opportunists who are using my name or my family name to advance themselves, from comedians to journalists to performers, book writers.
He forgot to ask, what was the easiest softball interview you've ever done? Oh, never mind.
This is the first White House where books have been written about, by the way.
Not the first White House.
This is not the first White House.
Thank you for that historical perspective. Look, apparently dozens of people want to be the next White House Chief of Staff. That's what the president says. Mark Meadows, we were talking about this during the break, could have been a good fit. I mean, there's some questions about his own relationships with his own leadership in the party, but the president should pick, at this moment in his presidency, after the election, heading into the Mueller probe, Democratic House, somebody he likes, somebody he trusts, and here we are. Used to be a plum job in Washington. Why is it open?
Yeah, he says he's got people lining up the door waiting to do this job. He told Reuters up to a dozen people. But we actually have a lot of people who have said that they do not want the job. And of course, if the president directly goes to them and says, take over for John Kelly and be the chief of staff, they don't really have a lot of wiggle room. But we know at least 3 members of the cabinet and the Yankees president said they do not want this job and are not interested. So I actually think it's been a struggle for President Trump because he's not used to being in this position where he doesn't have just a slew of people that he's got in his mind for this job. But that was one of the reasons he took so long for John Kelly to leave the White House, even though he and the president had had this very tumultuous relationship, is because there was no obvious replacement for him. Same thing with Jeff Sessions. There wasn't this obvious replacement. When President Trump has someone in mind, he doesn't mind pushing the other person out the door, as he kind of did with Reince Priebus when he had John Kelly in mind. So that's really been a struggle for the president. It's really a guessing game inside the White House who is going to be the next person to lead the West Wing.
It's taken on kind of a circus atmosphere. Wow. It reminds me a little bit of the guessing games and the drama during the transition. You have practically everybody in the White House has been named as a possible option. You have people like Piers Morgan throwing their hat in the ring. I mean, you have sort of people watching Newt Gingrich as he comes in and out of the West Wing. And just like there's all these sort of histrionics and not a lot of information.
I was going to say, it's interesting that you've heard the names tossed around of at least 2 kind of congressional people, though, because Newt Gingrich, fine, he hasn't been around since he's been off the mainstream, but if bring him back, or Meadows, I mean, look, the president's going to have a 2-front war to fight in the next 2 years, right? He's going to have to worry about his public messaging in 2020, but he also is going to have all these investigations napping at his heels, and he's going to have to figure out how to counter those, and somebody who knows the inner workings of Congress is kind of vital. So you pull in a Piers Morgan who doesn't have any of that expertise, or that sort of a type. I know. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You know what I mean. We're not trying to interpret his name here, but if they don't have somebody who knows the business, they need an insider. Otherwise, they're kind of.
I don't know who it's going to be, but I'm willing to bet it's not going to be Piers Morgan. He used to work here. He's a very nice man, but I don't think so. Up next, Nancy Pelosi.